Meeting will come to order. We are now holding a special meeting of the town of Stockbridge. I'd like to ask all the voters here tonight to share your printouts. We only have 80 prepared. We're very happy to have over 130 voters here tonight. It's an excellent turnout. Try it again. Better. Okay. Gene Rousseau from the planning board will pass out more if people need some. Regarding the microphones, anyone speaking from the floor, please come up and use the microphone here. We are being filmed by the local cable TV channel, and they can't hear what's being said unless we use microphones. So please, if you have remarks to address to the meeting, please come up and use the mic. Now proceed with Article 1.
Thank you, Gary. And before I proceed with Article 1, I want to introduce myself. I'm Deb McMenemy, and I am so grateful to you folks for coming here. We've been working on planning this meeting. Well, we've been talking about it for years because there have been several bylaws that need to be addressed, but this past fall, planning began in earnest, and the selectmen, working with input from the town council, Ray Mieres, and from our building inspector, Ned Baldwin, from the Conservation Commission, the Planning Board, the Finance Committee, and public comments that we've heard at hearings and meetings that we've held, we've come up with this list of, well, 10 bylaw changes that we'd like to introduce tonight. And I was worried. I was worried about the quorum, but you guys came through. I'm just delighted. Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we get started, and I would also like to, at this point, give particular thanks to Select Board member Steve Schatz for his extensive efforts and expertise that he brought to the planning and the wording of these bylaws, and in an effort to make Stockbridge, help keep Stockbridge the beautiful place that we all love to live in. Before we get started, I would like to invite Gary Pitney from the Planning Board to read into the record the recommendation from the Planning Board about tonight's bylaw changes.
Good evening. My name is Gary Pitney, and I'm the Vice Chairman of the Planning Board. And what I'd like to do is just read our memo to the Select Board into the record. The Planning Board unanimously voted at their meeting on February the 5th, 2013 to recommend approval of the proposed changes to Article 1 of the zoning bylaw provisions applicable to the commercial agriculture, and Article 3 for the zoning bylaw provisions applicable to the floodplain conservancy district, and to Article 4, the zoning bylaw provisions applicable to the Lake and Pond Overlay District, Stream, Pond, and Lake Protection District. Article 8, the zoning bylaw provision applicable to fences and walls, and to Article 9, which is the zoning bylaw provisions applicable to personal wireless service facilities, and Article 7, zoning bylaw provisions applicable to driveways and common driveways, with the inclusion of the following amendment. Under the table, which is number 6.161B, the maximum length of any driveway shall not exceed 500 feet measured from the edge of the surface of the street or road, provided, however, that a driveway exceeding 500 feet may be approved by special permit. That was the original recommendation. What we would like added is, after special permit, we'd like to include, or have it included, if a greater length is necessitated by topography or special conditions. Lastly, the Planning Board, with a vote of 4-1, voted at their meeting on February the 5th, 2013, to recommend approval of the proposed changes to Article 2, zoning bylaw provisions applicable to non-conforming uses, and Article 5, zoning bylaw provision applicable to the cottage area estates adaptive reuse or rehabilitation. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. And for the people standing in the back, there are some seats in the front row if anybody would prefer to sit in the front row. Okay. I would like to start with Article 1. I move that the town vote to amend the zoning bylaws in regard to commercial agriculture use as printed in the warrant.
Article 1 has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Ed?
I'm Ed Dartford. On item C, I have a simple question. Why is there a restriction on the amount of money that you must make for a 2-acre plot? The other item is the acreage on which the gross receipts have to be generated based on the acreage under cultivation or the size of the lot. It seems that if I had a 4-acre lot, if it's based on the size of the lot, I would have to come up with $4,000, but I wouldn't want to weed all of that.
Well, I don't blame you. The $1,000 associated, the $1,000 income generated by a 1-acre lot is not a restriction or a limitation. It is what the state Mass General Law has provided as a determining factor that the land would be indeed commercial agriculture. So that it's a number that was established by the state code. The reason we're asking to make this change in our bylaw is previously we were commercial agriculture use could be allowed on acreages of 5 acres or more. The state has lowered that standard to 2 acres, so we're suggesting these changes to be in compliance with the state recommendations, state laws.
So if I wanted to plant a row of pumpkins, let's say, on 1/8 of an acre and sell them and make less than $1,000, would I be a non-commercial agricultural use, and would it be permitted?
It seems like it would be a non-commercial use to me. Town Council Ray Miaras will comment on that for us.
The definition of commercial agricultural use is taken straight out of the state statute. The state amended the statute, so we just copied it. Now, you asked the question, would this be considered a commercial use? And I would say that if you have a row of pumpkins, chances are that's not your principal use of your property, and therefore it would be allowed as an accessory use. If it is 2 acres or more that are under cultivation and that you meet the other requirements here, that would be a commercial use, and that would be permitted. Now, you also asked the question about how do we do the, how do you compute the $1,000? And it's $1,000 per acre of land that is in cultivation. So if you have a 10-acre parcel, but you're only cultivating 3 acres, then you would only have to produce 3 times $1,000, $3,000.
Any other discussion?
So perhaps it should say acres under cultivation.
Do you want to make that in the form of an amendment, Ed?
Yeah, I propose that the acreage...
We need it in writing. I'm sorry, we need it in writing.
Pardon?
We need it in writing.
Oh, geez, I didn't bring a pen.
The amendment has been proposed to change the wording. Article 1, Section 2, C, 27C actually, to read, on the parcel annually generates at least 1,000 per acre, per cultivated acre, based on gross sales dollars. So he's added one word. The amendment adds one word, cultivated. Will this meet the statute of the state, Ray, if we make this change? Is there a second to the amendment? Second. Amendment's been made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Amendments require a simple majority. However, is there any further discussion on Article 1 as amended? Mike?
I have to state my name. Michael Roisman. I don't quite understand. If you have an acre of land and you cultivate a crop, what happens if you don't make $1,000 when you sell it? Maybe the crop is worth $2,000 and you just can't sell it all. Then what happens?
It's non-commercial?
And which means what? I'm confused. I don't understand what it means. You're not a farm?
The purpose of this bylaw amendment was not to restrict. It was, in fact, designed to prevent the town from restricting agricultural uses which met this $1,000 per acre test on parcels of at least 2 acres. So it actually adds to or gives a greater degree of permission for people to conduct agricultural uses on smaller parcels. And this is in compliance with state law. Our bylaw currently says 5 acres. So by bringing it down to 2 acres, we've actually enhanced or improved the ability of people to have commercial agricultural use on their land. That's the purpose of it. The language, again, tracks the language of the statute. We wanted to be certain that we were in compliance with state law. So the amendment is fine. I don't know that it adds anything. If anything, it further restricts the ability of the town to prevent commercial agricultural use. But so be it.
David?
Yeah, David Adler from Lee Road. Is there any way that we can adjust that amount, the $1,000 amount? We cannot adjust that down at all. And my second question is who will be enforcing this $1,000? I'm sorry? Thank you.
Unfortunately, like so many laws that we put on the books, many are unenforceable. So, I mean, that's really one of the problems with, that we have. Someone once said that we're hooked on law enforcement. The fact is that excuse me, Chief, I'm sorry about that. But, are we going to have agricultural police who are going to go around and ask for receipts? Of course not. Absolutely not. But we do have the bylaw on the books right now, and the bylaw is not in compliance with state law. We just want it to be in compliance, even if no one's checking.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Rob Murray. it just is on to this point. If, say, you had a piece of property that was less than even 1 acre, but you had a crop that was highly valuable and you were selling it, could you be forced not to sell it? And by the way, there is a movie out right now called Farmageddon, which is a documentary that shows that there are agricultural police stopping people from farming. So are there restrictions, you know, by not complying to this?
Okay, what you need to understand is right now, in order for agriculture to be a permitted land use in Stockbridge, there must be 5 acres. State law requires us to reduce that 5 acres to 2 acres with the proviso that those 2 acres generate at least $1,000 per year in gross sales. So that's all we're doing. We're trying to make this less restrictive than what the current bylaw is because the state is telling us we need to do it.
I guess my question was, why not eliminate the 2 acres and make it on any size property that needs $1,000?
The question was, why not eliminate the minimum requirement at all? And the answer at this point is that that's not what was proposed, and we can only act on what was proposed in the warrant. So if there's a desire to make the provision even more liberal, I'm sure that the selectmen would be more than happy to consider that in the annual town meeting. But right now, we're constrained by the 4 corners of the warrant.
Okay. Let me just try and set this meeting in some perspective. The meeting, the attempt to change some of these bylaws is not about sort of doing overall, major planning, major looking at zoning bylaws, land use patterns, effects on, encouraging housing alternatives and so forth. I mean, there's a lot more that needs to be done, a lot more that needs to be discussed, not the least of which is are some ideas that folks have about greater rights for farming. That's certainly an interest of a number of people here. Our goal in this meeting was to try and clean up some of the bylaws that no longer comply with either state statute, with recently decided case laws, and some federal statutes as well, as you will hear. There needs to be, we all believe that there needs to be an effort to look at the zoning bylaws and impacts and changes in the town generally, but not for this evening, and it's going to require a couple of years of study and a lot of citizen input in order to be able to accomplish that. So we are not insensitive to the comment about why impose this a 2-acre limit, except that it begins to go to sort of a broader issue of what has been characterized as the right to farm. That is, it's a much broader issue which needs a lot more community input. I know the moderator is very much interested in this. And so I just want to give you some perspective as to how this meeting was put together.
Yes.
Does this also mean,
You have to use the mic, please.
does this also mean that once again in the middle of Stockbridge can be livestock? Goats, pigs, cows in the middle of Stockbridge?
I hope so, but I'm not sure.
You hope so? I hope not. So does this mean now on any 2-acre parcel with a 100-foot boundary on either side, people can have goats and pigs again? And cows? Near my...
That's what the state law says.
Let's go to Boston and see if they want that in the middle of Boston. I think not.
Yes. Ellen?
Ellen McCormick, Cherry Hill. I guess that kind of answers my questions. I was going to ask if I could have a rooster.
Good question. We're not going to answer that, though. Is there any further discussion on Article 1 as amended? Seeing none, all those in favor of Article 1, please, as amended, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Article 2.
We thought that was the easy one. I move that the town vote to amend the zoning bylaws in regard to non-conforming uses and structures as printed in the warrant. Sorry.
Article 2 has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Yes.
I really don't understand the
Could you
language
state your
of
name?
this.
Could you
someone
state?
explain
Could you
it?
state your name, please?
Jane Ryan.
And what was the question?
The question is, could someone please explain what we're voting on?
This is a bylaw that is designed to respond to an appeals court case that basically says that the special permit granting authority, which happens to be the Board of Selectmen in this case, can no longer use a set of standards that are in the zoning bylaw for the purpose of determining whether or not a non-conforming structure is permitted. It essentially reduces the authority of the Board of Selectmen to make a two-part finding, one of which is whether or not there is a nonconformity, and the second one is, having made that determination, whether or not the new structure or addition to the building is more detrimental to the neighborhood in which it exists. And that is what the case law now says. So we have been bound by this case since 2011. The selectmen, in dealing with requests for special permits for non-conforming structures, have followed the case law, and we would like the bylaw to conform to the case law as well, because otherwise we have the anomaly of, we're applying Massachusetts case law, which is in apparent opposition to the town bylaw itself. The case law, I will tell you, takes precedence over the town bylaw. So it's, whether we agree with the case or not, it's decided law, and we just want to make sure that we are conforming, pardon the use of the word, to case law.
Any discussion? Yes, Sally.
Sally Underwood Miller, Prospect Hill. Steve, can you talk a little bit about how this would affect the land around the lake, which, as you well know, is sensitive to this kind of development? The more we have year-round houses up there, the more it's likely to change the character of the lake. We're seeing a lot of year-round houses. There's certainly salt going into the lake at this point. There are environmental issues that we're likely to see down the way, and the fact that the select board is not able to use its discretion in the way it's been able to in the past worries me significantly.
Sally, that's a very difficult question to answer, because the fact is that most of the development, if you will, of the areas around the lake took place starting after the town sewer project made it possible for the seasonal cottages to be converted into into full-time use. And that change occurred long before this case was decided. So it serves to highlight the fact that there has sort of the thinking about, what the lake area should look like is something that, might have been done 10 years ago, 15 years ago. The change in this bylaw is not going to significantly change the way in which the approval process has taken place in the past. The lake properties are, with the exception of perhaps a few in Beechwood, all non-conforming, and it immediately puts them in a different category. We're cognizant of the fact that there are wetlands there. Wetlands all over that area. But this bylaw change is not going to speed up development of development that's already occurred. It's one of those cases where the animals have already gotten out of the barn a long time ago. Again, is it worthwhile looking at non-conforming lots and different, lot sizes and so forth? For me personally, I think it is. But it may be a little bit late for the area that you're concerned about.
Yes, Les?
Len Schiller, 30 East Street. Just two questions. If I'm not mistaken, on construction operations, once a special permit is issued, I thought there's a change here that you have to commence now 6 months, and I thought it used to be up to 2 years that you have to have construction started in Part B, 611B. It says within a period of not more than 6 months after issuance of the permit. And does this apply to commercial properties as well as residential if it's in a non-conforming use? Sure.
The building code already requires that once the construction begins, that it has to be continuously pursued, and it has to be commenced within 6 months. So that's not a change. That's just articulating what the law already requires. As far as the commercial properties goes, the difference is for 1 and 2 family houses, as Steve explained, 1 and 2 family houses, you have to make 2 determinations, and either one of them gets you your special permit. Either it's not an intensification of the nonconformity, or you can determine that it's not detrimental to the neighborhood. And things that are considered to be not an intensification of the nonconformity is, for example, when you enclose an open porch, or when you put a second story on top of an existing wing that's already encroaching. Those things are not considered to be intensification. So it allows those things to be approved whether or not they meet the standard of not more detrimental to the neighborhood. Again, this is just required by case law. It's a new case. Well, and so we're just trying to bring our standard in line. Now, with respect, that is only with respect to 1 and 2 family houses. With respect to commercial properties or any other property that's not a one or two family house, then if you drop down to paragraph 6.12C, there is the provision that's applicable to other kinds of properties, not substantially more detrimental than the existing nonconforming structure or use to the neighborhood. So it always has to meet that standard. Whereas if it's not an intensification, a residential structure does not have to meet that standard. Okay?
Tom?
I am Tom Stokes, and I have a question and a couple follow-ups, so if it's okay if I just stay for that. So when you take away the, as you're saying, now the permitting authority, which in this case is the Board of Selectmen, have to both, in order to deny a permit, have to both find that it is a substantial increase in the nonconformity, A, and B, they have to find that it is substantially detrimental to the neighborhood. So my first question is to the Board of Selectmen, how are you going to determine that a project is substantially detrimental to the neighborhood? Yes, but I want to follow up on that.
I don't want this to sound flip, Tom, but it's by using good judgment. Because that, after all, is what, you know, town officials are elected or appointed to do, is to use good judgment. And, you know, it doesn't mean that the three of us or any, you know, Board of Selectmen think alike.
No, I think
and you know, and so it's based upon our considered judgment as to whether or not, I mean, do you want an example? I'll give you an example. I mean, we did a site visit in response to a special permit request where a neighbor was concerned about, you know, sort of light and air, view, and so forth. And we determined that from our lay perspective, because that's all we can bring to it, that the proposed construction would not adversely affect the neighborhood. Okay. And you know, it's just the case says we don't have this. Even the criteria in the existing bylaw has, I don't want to say room for subjectivity in it, but there's judgment that's required in every one of these determinations.
yes, but my reason for paying attention on this is because the existing bylaw has some criteria, whereas in terms
Which are no longer applicable.
which are no longer applicable.
That's correct.
And now it's solely a judgment call, so I think it's valid to ask about how this judgment call. So let me follow up, if I might.
Well, I'll just say that if the Gale case had not been decided, wouldn't be in front of the town meeting asking for this change.
I understand that.
Okay?
So so please, let me follow up. So, and I'm going to get to the Gale case, as a matter of fact. But let's say there is an application before the board, and nobody shows up from the community. Neighbors don't want to create bad relations with their neighbors, or for whatever reason, nobody shows up. You have a sense that this would be really bad for the neighborhood, but nobody has made a complaint. No one has given you a concrete reason from the neighbors. So you have to make the determination. Can you foresee a case when the Board of Selectmen would then say, even though nobody has complained about it, in our opinion, this would be significantly detrimental to the neighborhood?
Would you expect me to disagree with that?
I'm just asking you,
I mean, how could one disagree with that proposition? If we believe that it's detrimental to the neighborhood, regardless of whether or not people have come to complain, we're going to make that determination.
all right, because at the public hearing at the planning board, it was suggested that the primary way to judge whether it's detrimental would be
Well, you know,
input from the community.
I never said primary,
You
and
didn't,
it's an indicia of whether or not there is, at least some people believe, other people than us, believe that it's detrimental to the neighborhood.
All right, so let me just quickly, and I don't want to take too much time here. You mentioned that this is the whole mention that the Gale case was really the case that is really driving this situation. And the Gale case, well, I don't, you know, maybe somebody will ask about it and you can describe it, but I won't right now. But in your opinion, you said that the Gale case does not allow there to be in the town bylaws any written down criteria by which the Board of Selectmen can decide whether or not something is significantly detrimental to the neighborhood or not. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, would you be able to specifically point out in the Gale case or in Massachusetts common law why, if the Board of Selectmen in their judgment said, let's be upfront about it, we're going to put some let me finish, please. We're going to put some guidelines of what we think would be significant deterioration of the neighborhood so everybody can see, and then a future Board of Selectmen, and it doesn't say you have to, but the guideline says you may consider this, you may consider that, and you may consider the other thing. Can you specifically cite why that would not stand legal scrutiny by the Attorney General who must approve this bylaw?
I'm really not going to stand here and have a disputation over our interpretation of what this case
So this
is
is
about.
your interpretation.
This is
but
our
I think,
this is our interpretation of it, and you know, we're you know, as I said, we will make every effort to use good judgment in the way that the authority is given to us under this bylaw, as well as other bylaws as well, where either we or the planning board acting as special permit granting authority is required to use common sense. That's what
I respect,
you know,
Steve, very much your interpretation, but for the record, I would like to say that I have sought legal counsel, I've talked to lawyers, and it's not a unanimous consensus that are putting some guidelines on what would constitute significant negative impact on the neighborhood. The other people would argue that could sustain legal scrutiny. So
Tom, Tom, this is not about unanimity, and I will grant you that other people will disagree over a variety of things that are presented tonight. You know, I'm not in disagreement with that.
Okay.
Okay.
Ray, is there anything you could add to this to enlighten us? But it's up to you. Thank you very much.
Well, actually, this is how we got, part of the reason we got in trouble with the bylaw the way it is, because we had in the bylaw the way it is a number of things that we said we're going to deem these are the things that we're going to deem to be not in greater nonconformity. And it turned out our list didn't match what the courts came up with. And so, so it's the same problem. If we
Excuse me, but we're not talking about greater nonconformity here. We're talking
I understand.
about significant impact on the neighborhood.
Yes, I understand. So I'm just saying that this was by being more specific before we ran into a problem that we were, our list didn't match what the courts came up with. If we produce a list of things that we said these things would be substantially more detrimental. You could put that into the bylaw, probably would get approved by the Attorney General, and the case law may or may not back you up as it develops. The standard of not be substantially more detrimental than the existing nonconforming structure is the one that is in the existing bylaw now. It has been applied for years by the selectmen, including when you were a selectman, and nobody has brought to my attention any example where the selectmen have been unable to make an intelligent judgment about it. What the change is we used to require both a determination that it was not substantially more nonconforming and that it was not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. We used to require both of those, and now the courts have made it clear that we can only, if they're able to show, an applicant is able to show the first or the second, they're entitled to the special permit.
I have just one comment, that the issue of conformance with code is something that can be objectively determined with a tape measure and the like. The business of whether it is detrimental to the neighborhood is a very subjective thing, and it would be very difficult to write down specific criteria.
I think we have to remember that we elected the selectmen to do a certain number of difficult jobs. And if enough of us disagree with their judgment calls over a period of time, they will be voted out of office. But until that happens, their responsibility is to come up with these judgment calls. And they're going to do the best they can. Terry?
Terry Flynn. My first point is just to the moderator, my good friend, the moderator. But that sounded to me almost as if you're taking a position on something that's being discussed by the body. And
absolutely not. I'm just pointing out to the voters here that if they don't like what they have heard, they have the right to vote people out of office. And that's stating a fact, really.
Okay.
That we all know. Just reminding.
I just think that needed to be said. The second thing I'm just wondering about, and actually, I agree with your point in overall with town government that you know, to a great extent, we have to trust people's discretion, people in office, and to to a certain extent, and then elections can take care of the rest or whatever. So I don't disagree with that point. But the only thing that I am kind of concerned about is it almost seems as if this may be premature if we are going to be looking at our overall zoning much more carefully and making those kinds of judgments. I'm not so sure that it's necessary for us to be so much on our heels in terms of compliance with some state court ruling. I know that there's some danger in terms of lawsuits or whatever, but I think we could get focused on that before we focus on what we really are trying to preserve in the town or what we're trying to allow in the town. And so the whole question of criteria, whether that criteria became a part of a legal part of our bylaws or whether the criteria became some kind of a policy statement or whatever, I mean, that kind of thing is significant in terms of trying to get a handle on detrimental use, something that's detrimental to the neighborhood. So I'm not so sure that this is a good time to pass this. It might be much better off if we, wait for the serious investigation that Steve was saying earlier on that we really need to do for our overall zoning.
Tom, I'd just like to point out one thing. If you refer again to the proposed bylaw in 6.1.1, 6.1.2, in section B, Roman 2I. It's at the bottom of page 3 of the handout. What this says is that in making the determination as to whether or not something is substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, that the board may consider, to the extent deemed applicable, the standards set forth in section 6.3.6 of the bylaw, which are the very standards that are called into question by the Gale case. So there is a set of standards. It's not mandatory, but it's a set of standards to look to when making this kind of determination. So it's not as if the standards have been completely eliminated. They're just not mandatory any longer. So they are there. And those standards are, I'm not going to read them, they're in the bylaw.
Steve. Carol?
Hi, Carol Owens. Mr. Schatz, I just had a quick question. Did I hear you say in the introductory remarks that the Gale case was being appealed? Because if it's being appealed, we shouldn't vote now.
No, it's a case from the Massachusetts Appeals Court, which is the second highest court in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It is the law of Massachusetts.
And it's not being appealed.
It is
It's
not
in
being
place.
appealed.
Okay.
It's
Thank
not
you.
being appealed.
Yes, Miss.
Kate Fletcher, Hawthorne Street. I'd like to thank all the boards for their work on these proposed amendments. I do disagree strongly with this one, and I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Okay.
As close to the mic as possible. Tip it up a bit, maybe.
Kate Fletcher, Hawthorne Street, and for those of you who didn't hear me, I just thank the boards for their work on these proposed amendments. I will confess to being the lone member of the planning board that voted against this particular proposal. I do have serious concerns about the potential impact that this change might have on the character of the town. I feel that I made phone calls before the planning board meeting to encourage people to attend, and people who did attend were confused about what the meaning of this was, and many people who have looked at the wording found this to be a lot to absorb, and they weren't quite sure what the meaning was and what the implications would be for the town. I feel there should be more citizen involvement in something that has a potential to impact the town, as I think this may. I'm concerned about removing the specific wording. I think that I would welcome updating the master plan before we take on this change. It seems like it's very early on in the state law, and that we do have time to revisit the master plan. I feel strongly enough about this that I would propose that we table this amendment until the town has had more time to work on this.
Did you wish to put that in the form of a motion? Okay. Motion to lay on the table requires a second. Is there a second? Second. Article to lay on the table has been moved and seconded. There is no debate. There can be no amendments. Requires a 2/3 vote. May be reconsidered, and there is no interruption of the vote. So therefore,
2/3 vote for
to lay on the table, 2/3 vote. This is from Massachusetts town meeting time. Therefore, all those in favor of laying this motion on the table, please hold up your cards. Thank you. Cards down. All those opposed, same sign. All right, we do not have a 2/3 majority. We're not going to lay this matter on the table at this time. We'll continue discussion. Article 2. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of Article 2, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, we're going to have a show of cards, and this time I'm going to have to ask for a count. Chris, can you count this side of the room for me, please? And Terry, would you mind counting this side? Okay, all those in favor of Article 2, this needs a 2/3 majority. All those in favor, please hold up your cards. All those opposed, please raise your cards. Gentlemen, please count. I'd like to clarify, Mr. Flynn, your vote count on the yeses was 36? Well, the count comes out a total of 132 votes were cast. 2/3 majority of 132 is 88. 69 yeses, 63 noes. I'm sorry, 53. We're going to have to do this again. Excuse me, we're going to redo this. Where's my calculator when I need it? Yeah, but it's not 63. It's 53. Okay, so that makes a different total. 2. Yep. 3 is 81. Okay. Either way, 2/3 majority of the vote. There were 122 votes cast. 2/3 majority would be 80.1 and a half, roughly. We had 69 yeses. Therefore, Article 2 has failed. We'll move on to Article 3.
I move that the town vote to amend the zoning bylaws in regard to the floodplain overlay district as printed in the warrant. Second. I'll just make a quick comment about what this is about. On the handout for Article 3, the lead paragraph explains it, but essentially there are two items here. One is the amendments remove the provision applicable to the groundwater recharge areas, which will be replaced by a new section protecting the town's public water supply. And that's Echo Lake. And there is very specific in there as to what cannot be built around it or near it. And the second part of it is the amendments also assure that the provisions applicable to the floodplain district adequately meet the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program. And that essentially means nothing more than people who need flood insurance can purchase flood insurance in Stockbridge.
Article 3 has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Sally?
I have a couple of questions as to how this is going to be looked at, and they have partially to do with the changing in our climate and the likelihood that we will have a higher water table in the not too distant future, and so what that will mean in terms of the change of what is currently considered to be the floodplain. And also just to comment that the floodplain maps have been updated in many parts of Massachusetts, but they have not been, that's not been done here in Berkshire County. The floodplain maps are at least 20 years old. We have been told without doubt that we will not see any updated floodplain maps anytime in the near future. So I'm hoping that as part of our going forward in our planning, that we will look at all of those things.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, proceed to vote. All those in favor of Article 3, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Article 4.
I move that the town vote to amend the zoning bylaws in regard to Lake and Pond Overlay District as printed in the warrant. Second.
Article 4 has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of Article 4, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Article 5.
Article 5. I move that the town vote to amend the zoning bylaws in regard to cottage-era estate adaptive reuse or rehabilitation as printed in the warrant. Before, if I could just give a small summary of what this is about. There are two changes to the cottage area adaptive reuse or rehabilitation bylaw. One is to introduce another use into the the areas that are covered by this bylaw, which, by the way, is the properties in question are properties of 80 acres. They're described as 80 acres having a house on it that existed sometime during the so-called Gilded Age, which is 1870 to 1920. Whether or not that's accurate or not is not for this meeting, but that's the way the bylaw was originally written. This would introduce the concept of the use of these properties for resort purposes. The second part of the bylaw change would permit the construction of buildings which exceed 35 feet in height. The current bylaw in Stockbridge for all residential property mandates that no building exceed 35 feet in height. Now, what this bylaw does is to introduce a standard for the way in which properties can exceed that with buildings that are limited in height to 60 feet, but the 60-foot height is a height that you achieve by having a certain distance from sidelines, from streets and so forth. They're sometimes called reference points. So that if you're 1,000 feet away from the street and you build a building that's 60 feet in height, that's 1,000 feet away, it doesn't have the kind of visual impact on the street that a 35-foot height house would have if it were, just outside the residential setbacks. So it's about permitting higher structures to be built, but at the same time providing for protection for neighboring properties so that they're not being overwhelmed by buildings that are quite high and quite close to that structure. Now, it will come as no surprise that this bylaw change was, this is not a change to the bylaw, by the way, which was proposed by the selectmen, although we certainly support it. It was brought to us by the owners of Elm Court in their desire to change the use of Elm Court to a resort. We have looked at the request. We came up with this concept for increase in height in order to attempt to accommodate them, but while at the same time seeing to it that neighbors would not be adversely affected by structures that would exceed 35 feet. There were comments at the planning board hearing about this, which I know Jack had his hand up a minute ago, and I expect to hear a comment from him. So, be happy to answer any other questions if.
Jane Ryan, could you point out other buildings in the neighborhood that are 60 feet in height, so we could get a comparable, some sort of comparison? Seems to me that's quite high.
Well, again, it's 60 feet, but not 60 feet in proximity to neighboring properties or to the street. In this case, the bylaw provides that the height, the maximum building height, can increase by 3 feet for every 50 feet that such new construction is horizontally distant from the closest point of any lot line. So the further back you go, if you do any kind of triangulation on this, if you have a 60-foot structure, as I said, 800 feet away, 1,000 feet away from the street line, it is considerably smaller than the 35-foot structure at the street line itself. Just as if you took your house, your 35-foot house, and you put it 1,000 feet away, it's going to look smaller. Building heights are about, that is, the imposition of building heights and other kinds of restrictions like this are designed to reduce impacts on neighbors. They were also designed to prevent the loss of light and air for neighbors. And the way in which this is dealt with is by, in effect, pushing the buildings further back, further deeper into the properties so that they don't have the visual impact, cast shadows, things of that sort.
Nancy?
Nancy Socia, Rattlesnake Mountain Road. I was just wondering, as a tax collector, if we change a home from a single-family home to a resort, does that change the designation for real estate tax purposes?
Well, that's a question for the assessors, I think.
It wouldn't change it as a new designation, is it from an industrial or residential? to a new?
Well, I mean, I think that assessors would look at, major properties like, a property like this in a very different way that it's going to look from, at them as a single-family house, just in the way that they assess commercial properties differently from single-family residences as well.
So who would consider making it a new designation, between residential and industrial to a resort? Is resort different? I know this isn't the venue for this, but I was just curious as to if we now have a resort, would they be taxed differently?
You mean would the mill rate be the same? We have a unified, a single mill rate in Stockbridge. We don't. The assessed valuation is going to be different. If someone spends $5 million to build a resort, I assume the assessors will be assessing appropriately.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, but it's a question that would be difficult for us to answer.
Jack? Ed, I've called on Jack.
Jack Spencer, 14 Church Street, Stockbridge. I'd like to add the following wording to section 6.3, subsection D. Insert on line 2 after the word construction, the phrase of one building only. Right now it reads, any special permit issued pursuant for this section may authorize new construction that exceeds, et cetera, et cetera. There is no limit on the number of buildings of this height in this district, as long as the selectmen do it by special permit. So conceivably, there could be 3, 4, 5, or 6. I know it's a worst case thing, and it probably wouldn't happen, but there are 11 such districts in this town, and the potential for misuse is great. So I think it is fairly reasonable and actually generous to limit it to one in the district. If a applicant wishes to have more than one building in his particular district, he can go the old-fashioned way, which is to go to the Board of Appeals and ask for a variance, which is a different criteria, but they still have that option. So I propose the amendment.
The proposed amendment reads, add the following word to section 6.6, subsection 3D. Insert on line 2 after the word construction, the phrase of one building only. Is there a second to this amendment? Second. Amendment has been proposed and seconded. And again, Ray?
I'm going to have to work on the language. This isn't quite the way it's written now. It would allow one building per special permit. And I assume you mean one building per lot. So I just need to fuss with the language a minute.
Thank you very much.
Okay, while Ray's working on that, is there any other discussion on Article 5? Carol?
Hi, I'm still Carol Owens. Some people call me the cottage lady, so you know what I'm about to say. This is just wrong. It is wrong for so many reasons, but let me begin with this, and let me just say apologies to the Board of Selectmen. I know you're going to correct me when I'm done, but what I'm trying to explain is the extent, the potential extent of what you're doing. All buildings from Pine Street to Sargent Street on one side of Main Street, plus half of the land between South Street and the Old Town Hall on the other side of the street. On 183 from DeSisto through Kripalu. On Prospect Hill Road from Pine Street to Wheatley. And that doesn't even include Elm Court, and along the back from Elm Court to Tanglewood. And with respect to the perspective, it's absolutely true that if you distance a building from a sight line, the height of it will appear lower, and the intrusion on your sight line will be less. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 4 sides to a building. You can only lower it and distance it on one of those sides. The other 3 neighbors will be negatively impacted. Cranwell is a resort. It does very nicely. It adheres to the laws of the estate laws of Lenox, and it has no buildings of a height of 60 feet. Good God, 60 feet is 6 to 8 stories. This nice lady asked what other building we have in Stockbridge of that height. The answer is none. Cranwell makes money, has lots of beds, and has done very nicely in the community without a 6 to 8 story building. And lastly, sorry? No, no. No way. 60 feet is 6 to 8. Chris, that's 6 to 8 stories. Think about it. There's nothing in Stockbridge that high.
Carol, we have the building inspector here. He might be able to enlighten us as to how high the new building at Kripalu is.
How high is the new building at Kripalu? Chris, did you hear that? Yes. Okay. So we have 1. The answer is not none. The answer is we have 1. Too bad. I had a final point, and with the interruptions, I have forgotten it, but I will end where I started. Oh, I know what the final point was. The selectmen are now going to correct me and say that the vast amount of land in Stockbridge that I said would be affected by this would not be affected by it because of the words 80 continuous acres. Let me tell you, you pass this and you lay the groundwork for exceptions, for lawsuits on any of the other acreage where they want to do this and they say, how dare you rule us out? We have all the other criteria. So I'll end where I started. This is just wrong. Don't do it. You will change Stockbridge and you will not be able to put this genie back in the bottle.
Yes, David.
Good evening. My name is David Hellman of Butler Road, and I actually am the attorney who is representing Elm Court, and I would like to just clarify a few things. I agree with you, Carol, that in the abstract notion, 60 feet sounds very, very high, and we don't have buildings that high in this town. The specific reason that this is an appropriate use and an appropriate height in this particular location is that, first of all, you have to understand that our height measurements in our town are measured from 6 feet from the lowest point of the finished grade of the structure. The property at Elm Court and the property at DeSisto and many of the other cottage-era estate properties, they have lots of land. There's more than 90 acres here at the Elm Court. There's over 300 acres at DeSisto. The height of the building when you would see it, when you would actually measure it, it's measured right from the 6 feet from the lowest point near the foundation. It so happens that this point on the Elm Court property is of such a grade that we've done balloon tests, you cannot see anything other than perhaps the very top of the roof of the proposed structure from the road or from any of the abutters. In the Elm Court property, most of the abutters are more than 1,000 feet away, the closest one being about 400 feet away, and it's separated by a full tree line. In addition to which, there's another aspect of the bylaw, which is an important one, and that's the last part, which says that the elevation above sea level of the roof of the proposed structure at its highest point does not exceed the elevation above sea level of the roof of the existing principal structure at its highest point. So what this is basically saying, like, for example, Kripalu may be only 50 feet high, but it sits way up there. We can't miss it. If you're sitting down in a depression and the top of your building can't be any higher than the existing top of the roof of the existing Elm Court property, which is what the bylaw says, then it all of a sudden, it sounds in the abstract terrible, it really ruins everything, but in the specifics, when it's applied to the specifics, it may work. And in fact, we did balloon tests. We didn't pick this out of the hat. We did balloon tests. We invited the selectmen to come to the property so that they could view it for themselves and verify that, in fact, you will not see this structure from anywhere. Essentially, you will not see it from anywhere. Will it have some visual impact? Perhaps. Will you see it in the summer, in all the seasons, May, summer, and fall? Probably not. In the winter, you might see the top of the roof. And I say to you, this is just an aspect that allows the selectmen to grant for very specific properties. This is the cottage era estate bylaw. This is to deal with those properties that used to be known as white elephants. They were these big, massive mansions on lots of acres, and the town wanted to see them used and adapted. And so that was the purpose of the bylaw. This is in keeping with that purpose. And I tell you, and the selectmen will also, and there'll be public hearings. No one gets to do this without, this is not mandatory. This just simply says that it may be authorized if, in the opinion of the special permit granting authority, it's a reasonable thing to do and it meets all the other criteria of our bylaw. So I urge people to not just think that somebody's going to put up a 60-foot structure next to the town hall here and it will be this massive thing. Of course it would be. But the whole planning of this is to take something, not sprawl it. 35 feet is the height for a single-family home. We're not talking about a single-family home. We're talking about a hotel, a resort. That 35-foot height, if it's set, is an improper restriction if it's set in a location where it doesn't apply. And so I just urge the town to allow the selectmen to allow properties like this to be reasonably developed. The approval of this bylaw doesn't grant anything. It just gives the selectmen one more tool to say, we deem it more appropriate that instead of building low and taking up much more use of the land, we're going to confine it to an area where it won't be visible, make a smaller footprint, it's ecologically more sound, and it's not any more visually or aesthetically intrusive to the neighborhood. So I ask you, please let the selectmen have this discretion. I think it's a valuable tool, and otherwise what you'll end up is you'll having lots of more buildings because that's what you'll have to build if you're going to limit ourselves to the 35-foot height. Thank you very much.
Sir?
Richard Burrow on Main Street. I just have a question as to what the criteria was for Kripalu to get as high as it was, and could something be maybe put in the historic estate bylaw, maybe either lowering it or putting the criteria in that Kripalu built its addition to be higher than just the 35 feet. So I guess my first question is how did Kripalu get to be higher than the
Our building inspector can answer that. Ned? Ned, could you use the mic, please?
Capello is an educational use group, which is limited to 50 feet.
Is there other properties like Capello in that group that could go to 50 feet?
Their educational and religious use groups are 50 feet.
But how many properties would fulfill that criteria?
Marian Fathers,
Is that it?
I could think of.
Is there a way that we could just tie the same criteria to be put into this bylaw to make it the same as the educational criteria so that we
All right.
don't have this problem?
Town council will answer that.
In Massachusetts law, we have something called the Dover Amendment, which is special rules for educational and religious uses. Okay, so that's why Capello doesn't have to adhere to the 35-foot height restriction, because the Dover Amendment exempts them from our local zoning, except for what's called reasonable height regulations. And generally what that means is that they're entitled to go up to the 50 feet that is specified in the building code. So all of I mean, we're loaded in Stockbridge with educational and religious uses. It includes Tanglewood. It includes quite a large number of properties that have special exemptions under state law. There's not much we can do about it.
But it's 50 feet.
I'm sorry?
It's 50 feet for
That's,
those.
well, that's not in the zoning. That's in the
State law.
In the building code.
Well, I guess my question is, why can't we make this from 60 to 50 to be what anything else would be in those groups, and not have this not different? Why should this one be 60 if they're 50?
That doesn't strike me as being a legal question, so
No, I'm asking, why not consider an alternative of, instead of 60, 50, if that's what there is existing for exceptions in these educational properties, or do away with the 60 entirely and just not permit it? I think 60 might be a little excessive, but if 50 is allowed, or just not have it at all, they have to comply. But 50, I think, would be reasonable for a resort.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Sally?
This is my last comment, I promise. I just wanted to bring up the whole Scenic Mountains. We are one of the Berkshire towns that adhere to the Scenic Mountain Act of Massachusetts. And as such, many of the property, or at least some of the properties that would be considered under this great estate would be within the Scenic Mountain, which would mean that something that would be built at M Court, and I'm really not opposed to this, generally speaking, would not be able to breach the ridge line visually. So it would be seen less than we might think, depending on where it's located. However, having served on the Conservation Commission for a lot of years and administered the Scenic Mountain Act, there's a lot of screening that goes into our looking at this kind of thing, and I think I would really like to make sure that there is screening involved. I know you can see Elm Court from the lake, and how much you would see of it if it were to be expanded, I'm not sure, but I would like to suggest that we think about screening when we're talking about these big buildings.
Thank you. Sally? Carol?
Thank you. Just one last thing in answer to David. First of all, the ability to develop these estates into something useful, cost-effective, good-looking, is not reliant upon a 60-foot structure. Many, many, many of the estates have alternate uses now, are very successful, very beautiful. They didn't even add to the buildings, and they certainly didn't add something this substantial. Secondly, I have a deep concern about changing a bylaw that affects a whole town in order to address a problem and issue a desire of a single property. So if there is another way to address Elm Court and its needs and whatever without amending a bylaw willy-nilly, because all of a sudden one property in our town has submitted a request.
Is there any further discussion? Terry?
I guess the first point I just want to raise is that it deals with the whole concept of resorts, and I just want to make sure I understand this correctly, that the great estates right now are residential properties in residential districts. Is that accurate or not? Yeah.
These properties start off as residences. If they have a special permit,
right.
Under the existing bylaw, there's a whole series of uses, including hotel use, that can be permitted by special permit. So in the case of Elm Court, they already have such a special permit authorizing, I believe it's a bed and breakfast use.
So that sort of is one of the points I wanted to raise, is that right now we do have a capacity for these great estates to have some commercial use, just as somebody's house might become a bed and breakfast or whatever, but it's a special permit process. And I'm not against the idea of having Elm Court be a resort, but the only problem is, the first thing that pops in my mind is, okay, if we're going to do this, then what's to say that we're not going to have oak and spruces, which to me is a very negative term, throughout Stockbridge. Like, once we decide that we're going to zone in order to have this many properties potentially become resorts, then can we really do this in such a quick fashion without really carefully finding out what kinds of restrictions we could put on the use? If someone does build if you make a 60-foot height a possibility, is there a trade-off to that 60-foot height, where since one of the arguments in favor of doing this with Elm Court is to actually protect more open space, well, what's the guarantee? And this goes to Jack's amendment, which I think is what we're discussing. I'm not sure, but it's that the limiting it to one building, because if you don't, it may be that building one 60-foot high building can take up what can provide space that maybe 4 buildings or 3 buildings would have to be used for otherwise. But what's to prevent the property owners from putting up 4 60-foot buildings? It seems like there's an opening there.
That's what this is going to correct, this amendment.
So
we
amendment, right.
we should probably present the amendment now that it's been revised.
Right, and then the other point, which I may or may not come back on, is just the whole question of the specter of it's kind of wide open in terms of what resorts will be able to do, and I certainly would never vote for anything that I thought could result in an oak and spruce kind of development here.
At this time, I'm going to read the amendment that has been revised. It states, Article 5, Section 4, adding to Section 6.6.3, a new subsection following, as Jack said in his amendment, authorize new construction of 1 building per cottage-era estate. So that would take care of 3 or 4 or 5 buildings on any one estate or more. So that's the amendment, which we're going to now discuss. Is there any further discussion on that amendment? Yes, Helen?
Yes, that's a great amendment, but that is on the structure that's already there, that amendment?
New construction. This is new construction.
So if there's a house there and you want to raise that up to 60 feet, you don't mean that. It means that if there's a house there, then this other building can be built 60 feet high? Because that would be 2 buildings. I think 1 and 1 is 2. Been a while since I've been in school.
I don't see anything in this specific paragraph that says whether it's new construction on top of an existing building, is it?
No, the term new construction means new construction. Does not mean an addition to an existing structure.
Okay. So there's your answer to that. So you could have an existing structure, and now you're going to put in another one that could be 60 feet tall.
That's correct. The existing structure, the principal structure, is the mansion. This would allow a new building somewhere else on the same property to be authorized by the special permit and to have a height as it says in there, if it meets those criteria. Okay, but it does not authorize 2 buildings to have 60 feet. The existing building can't be increased in height beyond what the zoning otherwise would allow.
Okay. Les?
35 feet.
Which is 35 feet.
The 60-foot height is one thing. What is the square footage of that building? Is it, 50,000 square feet? Is it 180,000 square feet? If they want to do 90 rooms or 180 rooms and they're limited to one structure, what is the total square footage of that structure?
Is this a question for our building inspector? Do we have limitations on square footage?
If it was just a straight-out building permit, it would be 10% lot coverage of the entire property. But as a special permit, they would be restricted to whatever was granted as a special permit.
By the selectmen.
By the selectmen, correct. Also, I just might add here that Stockbridge has a much more stringent way of measuring the height of buildings. We measure the buildings from the lowest point to the highest point, and every other town takes the average grade plane of the building. So they take from the lowest point to the highest point all the way around the building and average it out, whereas we just take it from the lowest point to the highest point. So if you're on a hill and you want to build something higher, you're much more restricted, which I think is the case in this case.
Thank you, Ned. Is there any other discussion on the amendment? Yes.
Just quickly, this proposed amendment, I also feel would be a great thing to address.
Yeah.
Sorry. This proposed amendment, I also feel would be a really good thing to address in updating the master plan, and just a reminder that along with a 60-foot building will go a lot of lighting. In a resort, you're going to have food service trucks, increased traffic, and flood lighting. So something to keep in mind. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the amendment, which reads, Section D, authorize new construction of 1 building per cottage era estate. Now remember, this is an amendment to the motion. And then we have to go back and consider the motion as amended before we vote on Article 5. So right now, we're just voting purely on the amendment. So all those in favor of the amendment as read, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The amendment is carried. We'll now move on to further discussion on Article 5 as amended. Gene.
I'd like to just point out an issue. One of the motivations is that it will help a business project like a resort, which would perhaps add revenue to the town and taxation. But at the same time, we have known and seen that buildings can be sold or properties can be sold to not-for-profit organizations, educational, religious, or otherwise, which will remove taxes off our rolls. And so I think one of the motivations for increased revenue to the town is an iffy issue and not to be considered a sure thing.
Any further discussion on the motion as amended? Terry.
I'm just wondering what the selectmen have to say, or any other officials have to say about the whole question of resorts and our ability to, control to some extent the nature of those resorts if we approve these as resorts. Do you see that as a problem or not?
The whole cottage era bylaw came about, actually I don't remember when it came about, but I remember when it was revised to include commercial uses on property. And it was brought to our attention actually with the Elm Court project, when this great young couple who had grown up in town here wanted to be able to make a go of it, taking this big property and renovate it. And they wanted to be able to have uses so that they could actually afford to live there. And we added the commercial uses of it. We allowed for a hotel or restaurant to go in there, a greenhouse could go in there, or a nursery or a garden, landscape gardening. We allowed for agriculture. We allowed it to be a conference or a retreat facility, or we said it could be a studio where artists could work and display their art. So we really made an effort to accommodate the needs of the people that were interested in that property. And now obviously we have several properties in town that are looking at being economically viable. The plan that was proposed for this project, the 60-foot height, when we first heard of it, I said, 60 feet, that's crazy, that's too high, can't even think of it. When we went and saw the balloon test from the road, it's as David said, we could not see it from the road. And we went, I believe it was the fall, I know it was a cold day, but there were still leaves on the trees. We could not see it because of the way the topography on this particular location is. It's designed, this is written, this amendment to the bylaw is written so that the 60-foot height or any height of a new building would not be able to be taller than the existing main structure. This proposal doesn't exceed that limit. It doesn't create a visual impact that seems significant from the view that we saw. This seemed like a very reasonable approach to this property.
So on that, and I mean, I understand what you're saying, Deb, but that addresses the whole concept of the building, which I think Jack's amendment just addressed.
Mm-hmm.
But now the second part that I'm kind of worried about is the fact that this doesn't only allow for an exception within the Great Estates District, but it also creates a by right part of that district now to have a resort, as opposed to what you did for Elm Court, right, in terms of a special permit. Am I understanding that correctly? That this now makes resorts as part of that, or not?
It puts resort in our definitions of a bylaw.
Right.
I mean, it's in our bylaws as a
Right.
definition. Resort is there.
So that's what, so
But
that's
that
really-
doesn't say time-sharing units, and that's a whole other issue.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking for clarification, and what are the implications of putting that word resorts in? That's really what I'm asking.
But the resort would still be under special permit.
It would still be under special permit?
Yes.
Okay, so, okay, thank you.
And we do have to remember that it states here, it can go up to 4 stories or 60 feet, provided, however, that the elevation above sea level of the roof of the proposed structure at its highest point does not exceed the elevation above sea level of the roof of the existing principal building at its highest point. So that's something I think that maybe got a little bit confusing for people, that if there is an existing building, for instance, at Elm Court, any new construction can't, even if it has the permit to go 60 feet, can't exceed whatever the original building is. So it may be limited to 40 feet or 45 feet or whatever the existing building is, as this proposed bylaw is written. So I think the fear that there's going to be a new building that's going to be towering over the principal building on the property, that's not going to happen and not be allowed. Ed?
60 feet is pretty tall. Has the fire department weighed in on this? And in a few years, are we going to have to buy an expensive ladder truck?
The chief is shaking his head no. Any other discussion? Yes, Lynn?
Hi, I'm Lynn Schmitter from Old Tree Farm Road, right next to the Sisto School. I'm worried because a while back we had the potential of having a polo club in my backyard. And we had very little control over what was going in there. The people were very nice. They came and spoke to the neighbors. But there was going to be a lot of buildings built, big ones, not tall. I'm not worried about the height. But there were a lot of buildings going to be put there, and it was going to be a big impact on our neighborhood. There were going to be lights, there were going to be parking lots. The lights would be right in our backyard. I don't know how we are going to be able to control what a resort's going to do. There'll be noise, lights, traffic, and those are all things that I would like just some sort of assurance that life as I know it now in Stockbridge isn't going to change. I don't know if anyone can help me with that, but.
Thank you, Lynn. Any further discussion?
Is this considered spot zoning? Is this legally spot zoning?
Ray? No?
No, spot zoning is when you create a zoning district that is only applicable to one or a very small number of properties. This zoning provision applies throughout the R2 and R4 district to any lot that is, but the minimum lot size is 80. So the reason there are only a few properties that qualify is because there are not many lots that have 80 acres in a single lot. But it's a different concept from spot zoning.
But this really opens, this does open up all.
Please use the microphone.
So this article does open up all the other resorts, all the other applicable estates. It opens them all up to development. And am I confused that Elm Court, you've already given Elm Court special consideration before, and now they're back for this? Did I misunderstand that? Different. Same property. I don't care how many owners.
The cottage era bylaw is already in place. It already applies throughout the R2 and R4 district. The only change that is being proposed now are two. One is that we're adding a new use to the list of special permit uses, that being resort. And two is the provision having to do with exceeding the height restriction. The properties that are eligible for a special permit under the cottage era bylaw are unchanged from the existing ones. They're already eligible if they're eligible, and this doesn't change which properties will be eligible. Now, you asked the other question, does Elm Court already have a special permit under the existing bylaw? And the answer is yes, they do.
Any further discussion? Yes, Barbara.
I'm Barb Kinney, and I live on Meadow Road, and I have some concerns. Our property abuts the DeSisto property, and I'm just wondering, have there been any studies that relate to the traffic patterns and how the impact of a resort would relate to the traffic, the increased traffic, and the safety of the roads?
Yep.
That would come up in the special permitting process, and that's always part of the considerations. Traffic patterns, light patterns, noise patterns, all of that is part of the special hearing process.
So in other words, if indeed the DeSisto property is marketed as a resort, and if someone wants to develop it as a resort, they would have to get a special permit in terms of how that relates to the traffic?
Yes.
So right now, there haven't been any traffic studies?
Right now, there's no plan for DeSisto. That's come before us as a special permit.
I see. Just for discussion purposes, was there a traffic study in, that related to Elm Court?
In Elm Court, yes, there was.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
And it was considered, what was the result of that?
That the traffic study found out for the special permit that was granted to Elm Court was that it was not having a significant impact on the neighborhood.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Any further discussion? Terry.
I'm sorry, I just have one last question. Since we were able to give the special permit, and why do we need to have the word resorts put into this article? Because the article already contains the exception for the building height that was, requested by the potential developers. So why is that necessary to put in now? I just don't understand why that was put in, since you already had a special permit process that apparently could allow a lot of those functions. What are the implications? I really don't see the implications. I don't understand fully the implications of putting that word in. And I guess I'm obviously a little concerned that there may be implications that we're not thinking of, and that it's too soon to do it. And once again, it would be better to pass this without the word resorts. And I might be wrong, but I just need an explanation.
David, do you want to answer that question? You might.
Well, the primary purpose was to, the uses that would be intended in almost any of the places. We already have hotel as a permitted use and a retreat center as a permitted use. And instead of having to come before the selectmen with an aggregation of, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, it seems much more economical, much easier to say what we're coming before you with is a resort. It also has an understanding and a definition in some of the abutting towns like Lenox, which will be affected by this as well. We will also have to go before the town of Lenox to get a special permit. Everyone should understand that. And that it was just, instead of saying, well, we're going to be a hotel, and we're also going to be a retreat center, and we're also going to have a spa, and we're also going to have a tennis court and a swimming pool, it's just was called a resort. And then by bringing it into a definition that's consistent with the abutting towns, it just made a lot more sense.
Did you say that all those were permitted uses?
Those are all uses that are permitted by special permit already by our current zoning bylaw. So this, by calling it a resort, is really, in a sense, nothing more than aggregating a lot of what we already do and have permitted or allowed by special permit. So it's not creating, in a sense, a new use. It's just being more elegant in the definition of the use and also bringing it into conformity with our adjacent towns.
Okay, are we ready for the question? Any other discussion? Seeing none, proceed to vote on Article 5 as amended. All those in favor of Article 5, please hold up your cards. And would I ask Terry and Chris to do another count for me, please? Those opposed, please hold up your cards. One 116 voters voted. There were 61 yeses, 55 noes. Two-thirds majority would have been 76. Therefore, Article 5 has failed. Article 7. Article 6 has been withdrawn. We're going directly to Article 7.
I move that the town vote to amend the zoning bylaws in regard to driveways and common driveways as printed in the warrant, except as follows. By inserting at the end of section 6.16.1.b the following, quote, if a greater length is necessitated by topography or special conditions. I'd like to make a couple of comments on this. The handout for Article 7 is quite specific, and if you read the paragraph at the top, it basically explains what this is about. I suggest, does everybody have the handout or have access to the handout? Because you can read it just as well as I can read it to you. So I suggest you take a minute and read that. So since I know you're all fast readers, I'm sure you're done. Basically, what this does is combines two separate sections in the bylaws. And basically it cleans up and makes the items that did apply to common driveways also apply to driveways. I'd like to point out one item, which is on page 7, and it's in the upper left-hand corner. And it basically, it does state the planning board by special permit issued pursuant to the procedures and standards of section 6.3 as supplemented by this section may authorize, and this is the important part, driveways with a maximum grade of more than 10%, driveways with a maximum length of greater than 500 feet, and common driveways serving more than 2 lots, but not more than 6 lots.
Article 7 has been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Tom?
Thank you. This will be a friendly amendment, I hope. I'm concerned that with a limit of 500 feet, except by special permit, it's going to discourage long driveways when that might help conservation, scenic views, and agricultural considerations. So I would like to make the following amendment, which is to section 6.16.1, paragraph B, where the planning board, which says a permit, which says a driveway exceeding, I'm just paraphrasing, 500 feet may be approved by special permit if a greater length is necessitated by topography and special conditions. I think you've already accepted that part of it from the planning board, and I'd like to add these words which sort of give some scope to what these special conditions would mean. So the words I would like to add following necessitated by topography or special conditions are, which may include conservation, scenic landscape, or agricultural considerations. Just, if I may just explain a little bit, I'm concerned that if people have a large piece of acreage, that if there is a guideline that says it really shouldn't be more than 500 feet except for special conditions and by special permit, then people will be discouraged from keeping open fields that are really an asset to the whole community, especially those alongside the byways. So I've written this out, Mr. Moderator, and I move that this be an amendment.
The proposed amendment would be to include at the end of special conditions, which may include conservation, scenic landscape, or agricultural considerations. Is there a second to this amendment? Is there any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the amendment. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried unanimously. Is there any further on the Article 7 as amended? Ed?
Yeah, the same paragraph there, 500 feet, it says measured from the edge of the surface of the street. Well, now that's at the whim of the highway department, state or town. It really should be measured from the property boundary. This, by the way, was an issue when I put an addition on my house. It made a big difference whether it was from the street or the property line.
Is our building inspector still here? Ned, has this been an issue with any of these? Using the highway bound rather than the property boundary? To establish the start of the driveway length? Are you familiar with that being an issue? Apparently it was with Ed.
I don't know if it ever was an issue, because I made sure with it from the property boundary, from the state right away, and not from the pavement. And there was about a 15-foot difference between those. And it might not make a difference with a 500-foot driveway, but with a property setback, it did make a difference. It's just that, you know, the property boundary is something that's well established and documented and everything, whereas the pavement is whatever they decide to do.
Town council have an opinion on this? We want to move along quickly here because we don't want to lose our quorum before we get to the Article 11.
The purpose of making it from the edge of the pavement is that that's how you would measure, say, a subdivision road. The planning board, you know, already in its subdivision regulations does not allow dead-end streets more than 500 feet. We're trying to do it as comparable to what the planning board does for subdivision roads as possible. So that's the reason why we chose to use the edge of the pavement.
Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on Article 7 as amended. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Article 8.
I move that the town vote to amend the zoning bylaws in regard to fences and walls as printed in the warrant.
Article 8 has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Deb, do you want to explain this briefly? Or do we don't need to?
Well, basically the bylaws, as they've been enforced, pretty much, is that it talks about the height of walls and fences on properties, and it says that fences and walls on the sides of properties and on the back of properties are not to exceed 6 feet. And fences and walls on the front of properties are not to exceed 4 feet. And that's what's been enforced, and that's what we're looking to have the language in our bylaw clearly state.
Article 8 has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried unanimously. Article 9.
Article 9, I move that the town vote to amend the zoning bylaws in regard to personal wireless service facilities as printed in the warrant. Second. Okay, the brief explanation is that the original bylaw designated 4 areas for cell towers. No application has ever been made for any of those parcels. In the meantime, we've had significant changes in federal law. The Communications Act, Telecommunications Act, of 1996 and amendments to it have made a good part of the existing bylaw rendered it meaningless. There is also the introduction, as a result of recent changes in the Telecommunications Act, a requirement, what's called a shot clock, that basically requires that the town act on applications within 150 days. You can debate the national policy reasons for why the act was passed, but the fact is that it's there and we have to live with it. No town has been basically successful in challenging this in Massachusetts within the last 10 years. Our biggest problem right now, as many of you know and perhaps experience, is that we don't have adequate cell phone coverage for a significant part of the town, with the result that there are personal safety as well as health-related issues and service issues as a result of not having that service. So this streamlines the process a bit. It brings it into compliance with federal law, and we can only hope that that someone will come along and decide to take advantage of this bylaw. So that's what this is about.
Article 9 has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried unanimously. Article 10.
This is Article 10. I move that the town vote to amend the town bylaws in regard to cemetery regulations as printed in the warrant. I can explain this briefly. Again, if you have the handout for Article 10, in section 1.7, what's highlighted in bold type is what we propose changing, or adding actually. And it says, I'll read the whole thing. It says, monuments and headstones must meet the requirements of 2-foot side setbacks, 1-foot head setback, and 30-inch height limit. Provided, however, that the Cemetery Commission may designate areas in the town cemetery where monuments and headstones of a greater height may be approved upon application. And then it says all markers and cornerstones must be flush with the ground. The Cemetery Commission, which the selectmen are on, there's many people on the group, I think it's 5 or 6 or 7, but received a request from the Fitzpatrick family for permission to put a monument greater than 30 inches for the family near where Jack is buried, obviously. Right now, due to the bylaw as it reads currently, there is a 30-inch height limit. And as a result, the Cemetery Commission would like to be able to approve these upon request, application, and so forth. We don't feel there'll be a whole lot of these applications in the future, but we wanted to accommodate the Fitzpatrick family.
Did I hear a second? Yes, you did. Article 10 has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of Article 10, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried. Article 11.
I move that the town vote to raise and appropriate a sum of $25,000 to be spent under the direction of the Board of Selectmen to retain an engineer for the purposes of reviewing the performance of the existing HVAC system at the town offices and making recommendations for possible improvements and/or alternatives to the existing HVAC system.
Article 11 has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Helen?
I was just wondering, why couldn't this be brought up with the engineer or the people that put in this thermo heating for the town hall? And it seems to me at my place, if something didn't work out right, I'd go back to the person that put it in and see if they couldn't adjust it. And I don't see any need to spend $25,000 on another engineer when you must have gotten one. And what's wrong? What happened?
Yeah, well, that's a very fair question. I mean, and that's exactly what we have been trying to do since this was installed. This was, you know, we had really good intentions on the heating system for this building. We wanted to make this a geothermal heating system. This was what, when we decided as a town that we wanted to renovate this building into our town office building, this was one of the recommendations that was put forth by, we actually had a reuse task force that several of us served on, and making this building green was one of the desires of the group, and it was one of the desires of the town. So we, in good faith, gave our contractor and our architect the instructions, let's see how we can make this geothermal system work in this building. So the architect hired what he was told was the New England expert in geothermal designs. So this was, the technology was new at the time. It hasn't worked. I mean, clearly, we walk into this room tonight, it was 59 degrees. It's up to 63, which has been warm for this room recently. It's really, the whole heating system has been, I guess, a series of unfortunate events is the best way to put it. And it's not, I mean, we've been trying to fix it as in every way that we've gone. We went after the contractor and asked him what happened. We asked the geothermal expert what happened. We were told that this geology would support the geothermal system that he had designed. The contractor hired a well driller. The well driller came along and said, oh, well, you know, we're going to put in the design called for 3 1,500-foot wells. When he first dug down, he hit water at 500 feet. So he thought, okay, well, this is good, but now we'll redesign it for the 500 feet level. And it didn't work. We found there was more sand in this property that people had imagined. The whole thing, as I said, we went into lawsuit over this. We withheld payment. We ended up settling with the contractor, with the well driller, with the architect, with the town. It's just been one series of disappointments after another. I wish I could say, yes, we could go to one person and say, fix it. We tried. It hasn't been working. It's still not working. We need to find we need to find an answer to fix it. And at this point, we've tried all the resources that we've dealt with in the past, and we feel that it's time to get an objective assessment in, an engineer that will look at what we have here, see if it can be fixed, or see if we have to start all over. It's disappointing, it's embarrassing, but at this point, from the advice that we've had, we feel that this is the best approach to get a new evaluation and assessment of what we can do to fix this.
Helen?
Would it be better to try to go to a regular heating system? Do you have to have an engineer to come to tell you to put it over onto the regular heating?
We have had a rough estimate of going to a whole new regular conventional heating system, and the price of that is quite frightening. We really thought it makes sense to see if we can make this one work, or what exactly is going to be the fix for it.
The problem, you know, you get these engineers in, how you're going to know that this engineer is going to know anything more than the past engineer?
Because I know, it is.
And another thing, if you go ahead and do that, I would suggest holding back some money, not paying them the whole thing.
Well, that's what we did the first time.
You did?
Yep.
You held back?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you didn't hold back long enough.
Well, it's been a big disappointment, Helen, there's no question about it. But we would put out a very technical request for proposal from an engineer to come and give us a study and evaluate the system in the best way possible.
And that would cost less
25,
than
up
going
to
a-
$25,000 for the engineering study. That would then put us in a position where we could have plans that we could then hire a contractor.
Yeah, but then how many more thousands on top of that?
That would
it
remain
still
to be
more?
seen. That's what the study could determine for us.
Then can it be brought back?
It would
that
have to
if-
be. We can't spend a dime without town approval.
Yeah, okay, because I'd like to know the difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to know too.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
I'd also like to point out that the Finance Committee investigated this article and approved it unanimously. Ed?
I think somebody ought to write a grant proposal to the Obama administration. Obama is very up on green energy, and point out he's got another cylinder on his hands here in Stockbridge, and we all voted for Obama. So maybe the feds could come through with some money, either to fix our system or to at least pay for the engineer. You could say that if we don't get some action on this, we're going to have to put in a great big dirty oil burner.
Michael?
You can tell me if I'm out of place. Michael Nathan, you can tell me if I'm out of place. Can I just make a request, even though we're talking, that this was how many things that we're voting on? 11. I'm seeing it for the first time. Most of us are seeing this for the first time that I've asked, that there should be sent, if this could be done, it's on a computer, could be sent by PDF to everybody in Stockbridge, or at least an email or a call like you did, which was fantastic, and say, pick up the proposal so you can read it and give us a few days to look at it. But in a way, this was very unfair to us as a town, that we get this at the last minute to read it and analyze it and discuss it intelligently. I mean, we all discuss it intelligently, but with any insight, because some of these things were a lot of gray areas that I was agreeing and then not agreeing. I would have liked to have read this prior.
May I? That's a fair comment, Michael. We did have a public hearing with the planning board, as it was required, where this was all discussed. This is available online, and I know people did go online and look at it there. We'll make an effort to educate the people about what's going on, but obviously there's more work that needs to be done.
Greg?
You could have said in your phone call, just look online.
Out of order.
Craig Moffett. I just want to verify a point. Do we have an engineer for $25,000, or are we just billing, we're saying we have $25,000 to spend if we need it? In other words, where's this $25,000?
We're asking for up to $25,000 to pay for an engineer to evaluate our system. We don't have anybody in mind for this. We have to send out a request for an RFP.
Any further discussion?
Hi, Thomas Bellman. Where can we read about all the proposals for tonight's meeting? On what website?
It's townofstockbridge.com.
Okay.
Yes. It's .com.
Mary Green,
Mary, yep.
Lincoln Lane. I'd like to know, can you give me some idea where you came up with the figure of $25,000? I mean, is that what it costs for an engineer to do a study, or to even give you an overview? Is that a general
Actually, two members of the planning board are very involved in HVAC. Finance Committee, sorry, absolutely, Finance Committee. I said Planning Board, it was the Finance Committee. And they met with other engineers and conferred with each other and got input from people who do these kind of things, and this number was suggested as an outside upper limit of what it would cost for this study.
And the original engineer that was hired, how did we find him?
The contractor for the building project, the architect, hired him, and he was, at that point, the expert in New England on geothermal installations.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Angela?
Angela Vagno from Glendale, but also the PTA president at the middle school, who has the exact same, as I understand it, geothermal heating system. And they also have problems, and they hire someone from out in the West Coast, and they also have a lot of sediment. And I'm just wondering what the comparison is, or what the investigation has been related to that school building.
That's probably more technical than I'm aware of. I know that also with the middle school, it's the middle school you said? I also believe they have a backup conventional heating system. You know, they didn't rely solely on the geothermal, which is what we did. And you can feel how it's working in this room. Not so good.
Yes.
Will Berkshire Gas come and evaluate it for a conventional system?
Yeah, please use the mic.
Will Berkshire Gas come and evaluate this and evaluate it for a conventional system?
I don't know what the engineer would recommend. There are other things that are being considered besides a conventional system. Some of the specific problems in this system are filtration and flow and the wells, and these are very technical parts of this that need to have professional evaluation.
The question is, will Berkshire Gas come and look at the building and give you a separate evaluation to abandon the existing system and go with a conventional system?
I don't have the answer to that question.
Maybe we should call them, because they do it for nothing.
Any further discussion on Article 11? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of Article 11, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Article 11 is carried. Thank you for your attention. Is there any other business that should properly come before this meeting? Michael?
Michael Roisman, 44 Glendale
Speak up, please.
Michael Roisman, 44 Glendale Road. Lennox and Pittsfield were able to go into the state for solar energy, and I was reading in the Eagle that other towns can apply to the same grants for solar energy. So I'm wondering how Stockbridge can apply for solar energy grants. Did I make myself understood?
We did, and we have one. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Any other business?
When do we find out if we are approved?
Any other business? If not, I declare this meeting officially dissolved.